For the clarity of this story, I should mention that I have a hearing disability that has made me hard of hearing. I know there are some things in life that I'll never understand, but I still look back on this experience wondering what could have happened and what I should have done differently. This all happened around a year ago. The holiday season had just passed, and I was settling down from traveling and family get-togethers. I live in a small suburban neighborhood bordering a forest in southern Quebec. It's a quiet area, and most of the residents are familiar with each other, which I honestly prefer because it gives the place a warmer atmosphere. Around winter, I like to take my dog Monte on walks in the local forest. He's a Rottweiler Husky mix, perfect for me since I enjoy going for runs from time to time. The forest has several trails, none of which are challenging for non-hikers. I remember it being an afternoon. I had just finished a late lunch and decided to burn off the calories with a walk with Monte. As usual, he went ballistic when we turned the corner toward the forest entrance. It was relatively cold for a February day. A fresh blanket of snow lined the paths overnight, creating a nearly blank canvas. I let my dog off the leash so he could run around. There were a few yellow patches and some boot prints in the snow, which told me several people had already taken their dogs out earlier. Most people like to go on walks before noon since the sun tends to set around 4 p.m., so I didn't expect to see anybody out that late. After walking for about 30 minutes, we came to a fork in the path. I noticed that one of the trails hadn't been walked yet, so feeling a little adventurous, I decided to take it. I know the trails very well, so I knew exactly where I was going. The trail led to a clearing, which was great because I wanted to test the binoculars I had gotten for Christmas and look for native birds. While scanning the surroundings, I noticed a strange shape along the tree line in the distance. When I focused the binoculars, I saw a blue tarp and what looked like a makeshift shelter. As curious as I was to check it out, it was getting dark and I wanted to get home. I turned around and started walking back with Monty. As usual, he ran ahead. But something about his behavior seemed off. He was much more alert and was sniffing the trail more than he normally would. Then I looked down and froze. There was a set of footprints in the snow much larger than my own. I remember turning my boots over just to compare them. The prints were definitely different. There were no other forks in the trail, so whoever made them had to have passed me at some point. I assumed the person must have passed me while I was distracted using my binoculars. At the time, that seemed like the most logical explanation, so I tried not to overthink it. By then, it was significantly darker outside, though I could still make out my surroundings. As we were walking back, Monte stopped abruptly and started barking relentlessly behind me. When I turned around, that's when I saw him. A man, probably around 6'4", wearing charcoal-colored snow pants and a white camo jacket, was standing only about a meter away from me. He didn't move toward me, he just stood there with his hands in his coat pockets. I didn't recognize him from the neighborhood, so I assumed he was some hiker or someone from out of town. He looked like he was muttering something, but I couldn't read his lips because of the darkness, and I couldn't tell if he was speaking English or French. I felt stupid for not bringing my phone with me, so I tried to explain to him that I was hard of hearing and that it was getting late. I got back home around 4:30. By then it was completely dark. I followed my normal evening routine and didn't think much about the encounter. But in the middle of the night, something happened that still shakes me to this day. I woke up to Monte licking my hand, which is what he usually does in the morning to wake me up. I checked my phone and saw it was 3 a.m. I also noticed a message from my neighbor asking if everything was okay. She said Monte had been barking like he was possessed. That confused me, until I realized Monte was no longer in my room. I went downstairs and found him barking hysterically at the patio door. As I approached the door, my vision was still blurry from sleep. Then the motion sensor light outside turned on, and my heart dropped. The man from the forest was standing in my backyard. I didn't waste a second. I stepped away from the door and texted 911. I ran upstairs with Monte and grabbed the machete from under my bed. I'm a shorter woman with a background in martial arts, but I know the best move in a fight is to avoid one if possible. So I sat in my room, guarding myself and Monte, waiting for the police. With my heart pounding, I sat across from the bedroom door while Monte stayed beside me. Then suddenly he sprang up and started barking violently at the door. My hands were sweating as I watched a shadow move beneath it. The movement told me the man was right outside and could break in at any second. Those were the longest minutes of my life. I kept expecting the handle to turn or the door to splinter open. Luckily, it never did. When the police arrived, I explained everything while they searched the property. The patio glass had been smashed completely, but nothing seemed to be missing. They found the backyard gate open. It led directly to the forest, which is where they believed the man had escaped. I told them about the shelter I had seen in the woods earlier that day. I ended up taking Monte and some of my things to stay with a family friend for a few days while the patio door was repaired. I never got any follow-up from the police. But ever since that day, I only walk my dog on the roads now, and I try not to think too much about what happened. My name is Ember, and I'm a 16-year-old girl living in Illinois with my younger sister Kate, who's 15. My dad works for a deforestation group about 30 minutes from our house. It was a normal morning on December 5th, and my sister and I were getting ready to go to the movies. We decided to watch a somewhat new horror movie, Terrifier 3, which had some Christmas stuff in it. We knew it was 18 plus, but nobody really paid attention. Plus, we looked older than we actually were. We got into the theater without a problem. But halfway through the movie, just as everyone was focused on the screen, my phone buzzed loudly enough for the whole theater to hear. Everyone turned toward me with annoyed looks, and my sister and I hurried out. On the way out, I tripped, which made it even more embarrassing. Once outside, I checked my phone. It was my dad. But instead of calling back, I got a text message that said something like, "Hey, would you mind bringing me some lunch since the small cafe in the woods is shut today?" I looked at Kate, and she looked just as confused as I was, but neither of us second-guessed the message because it seemed normal enough. We went home, packed some food for him, and took my car downtown toward the woods. I had always loved that area and never felt uneasy there because it was secluded but beautiful. There was a hill leading down to a lake, perfect for fishing and photos. After a while, Kate and I got out of the car and walked down the path through the woods. I tried calling my dad, but he didn't answer. Confused, I looked at Kate again. Why wouldn't he pick up if he had just contacted us earlier? I messaged him instead, reminding him that we were at the woods with his lunch. A few moments later, the typing dots appeared. Then he texted us back, telling us to walk down the small hill and wait for him by the lake. So we did. The sun was setting, and the winter sky had this beautiful orange glow over the hill and down toward the water. Then Kate pointed toward the lake. A man dressed in black was sitting on the deck with his back to us. We assumed it was our dad. We walked closer and stopped a little behind him. I called out my dad's name, but he didn't move. Kate started looking uneasy, and that instantly made the whole scene feel wrong. Slowly, I reached forward and pulled back the hood he was wearing. It wasn't my dad. Kate and I screamed as the man turned around, smiling like a maniac, waving my dad's phone in the air like he was enjoying how scared we were. I shouted, asking why he had my dad's phone, but he didn't answer. Instead, he lunged at us and grabbed Kate's arm. Luckily, I was strong enough to yank her away, and then we ran. I have never run that fast in my life. Behind us, I could hear heavy footsteps getting closer, which meant he was chasing us. I didn't even dare look back. We finally reached the car. I slammed the door shut, locked it, and the man came right up to my window. Then he suddenly crouched down out of sight, just as I reversed and sped away. When we got home, both my mom and dad were there. We came in panting, completely out of breath, and explained everything. My dad was furious. He said his phone had been stolen while he was working, so he had already come back home. That meant the man had used his stolen phone to lure us into the woods. My dad called the police and filed a report. They used the phone's IMEI number to track it, and they found it still lying on the deck by the lake. They returned it to my dad, but told us there wasn't much they could do since the phone had already been recovered. I thought that would be the end of it. It wasn't. About 6 hours later, around 1 a.m., I got a message from an unknown number. It said, "I like that your house is lit only by your bedroom TV." I went ice cold. I paused the TV and listened. Then I heard rustling outside my window. My room was on the second floor. I slowly peeked through the blinds. The man was outside, smiling with a gun pointed at my window. I screamed and jumped back just as the glass shattered across my room. My parents ran in, followed by Kate. I yelled at them to crouch and told them the man was outside with a gun. When my dad went to check, the man was gone. Then we heard another loud bang downstairs, more glass breaking in the kitchen. We ran into a bedroom, locked the door, and Kate called 911. My mom hugged us while we cried in fear. The whole time I couldn't stop wondering how he had found our house. A few minutes later, the police arrived and searched the property, but nobody was there. Kate and I explained everything again, and one of the officers suggested checking the car. That's when they found a small AirTag attached to one of my tires. That explained everything. It explained how he found our house and why he crouched down near my car before I drove away from the woods. The police said they would patrol the area and do everything they could to find him. A few months passed, and he still hadn't been found, but thankfully, he never came back. Even now, my sister, my parents, and I are still traumatized by what happened. More than anything, I still feel stupid for not realizing sooner that something was wrong when my dad only responded through text and wouldn't answer a call. All I know is I'll never go to a secluded place like that again, especially when I'm responsible for someone else's safety. It was 2021, and the one word I'd use to describe that day would be hectic. Work was a complete mess. It was prime COVID time, so I was working from home. I was supposed to meet my extended family upstate, but I ended up getting stuck in a nearly 3-hour Zoom meeting and got off a whole hour and a half after everyone else had already arrived at my parents' house. And that didn't even include the next 2 hours it would take me to drive there. Before leaving, I filled 2 cups of coffee in my kitchen because I knew I'd need them. The second I opened my front door, I realized the drive would be worse than I expected. The snow and wind had already picked up, and the streets were barely plowed. There were at least 2 feet of snow on the ground already, and it was supposed to keep snowing most of the night. I had to drive under 25 miles per hour on most residential roads. My car at the time was an old, crappy Hyundai, definitely not ideal for extreme weather. It didn't even have anti-lock brakes. Once I got onto the highway, though, I sped up to around 70, which was probably way too fast for the conditions. I finally arrived at my parents' house around 9 p.m. They had already started dinner without me, but thankfully not too far along. A few drinks and some gift sharing later, I got so caught up visiting family that I basically forgot I still had to drive home. By the time I finally got back into my car, it was past midnight, and at least another foot of snow had fallen. I was buzzed, but I convinced myself I was sober enough to drive. Not that I condone drinking and driving at all, I was just tired and wanted to get home. As I headed toward the highway, I noticed the roads were completely dead. That's when I made a terrible mistake. I raised my speed to about 40 on one particular road. As I approached a bend, I realized my car had started to skid. At first, I tried not to panic. It wasn't the first time I'd skidded in snow. I tried steering into it and downshifting. But as I got closer to the curve and the car still wasn't slowing down, panic set in for real. The car slid straight off the road and slammed into a tree. The airbag went off, and for a moment I was too stunned to think. Thankfully, I was mostly unhurt. But the car was done for. The hood was buried into a snowbank around the tree, and there was no way I was getting it back onto the road. The first thing I did was call roadside assistance. They told me they'd send a truck, but because of the storm it could take up to 40 minutes. I was stranded on a deserted road surrounded by forest, with no houses for miles. So I called my parents too and asked one of them to come wait with me. My dad said he'd get in the car and head over. Then I sat there and waited. After a while, through the sound of the wind, I started hearing something else. Footsteps in the snow. I couldn't tell exactly where they were coming from, but they sounded distant. I opened the driver's side door and stepped out, looking over the roof of my car. The footsteps stopped. Then I heard something even worse. A strange wet slurping sound. It's hard to describe, but that's exactly what it sounded like. I looked toward where I thought it was coming from and saw movement near the tree line. It was dark as hell, but I was pretty sure I was looking at a person. I called out, "Hello?" The sound stopped. Nobody answered. I stood there awkwardly for a few more seconds, but no one appeared and I couldn't see anything move anymore. At that point, I was officially freaked out, so I got back inside my car and locked the doors. Less than a minute later, I heard footsteps again. Then something hit the passenger side window, like a rock had been thrown at it. I still couldn't see much because the windows were covered in snow. So once again, I got out of the car to check. That's when I made a disturbing discovery. There were boot prints in the snow circling all the way around my car, then leading away from the passenger side into the woods. And mixed in with them were drops of blood. I felt sick. I opened the driver's door, reached into the glove compartment, and grabbed my 9mm. Clutching it in my hand, I started following the prints into the woods. At that point, I was certain someone had been out there with me. As I followed the trail, the drops of blood got bigger and bigger. Then I saw a dark shape lying in the snow just past the tree line. I couldn't tell what it was, and I was praying it wasn't a person. I pulled out my phone and turned on the flashlight. It wasn't a person. It was a dead deer. Something larger had torn it apart. Its stomach had been ripped open, and most horrifying of all, the deer had been completely decapitated. I swept my flashlight around, but I couldn't see the head anywhere. At that point, I decided this had gone way beyond weird, and I turned back toward my car. When I got back and opened the driver's side door, I nearly threw up on the spot. Sitting in the driver's seat was the severed head of the deer, placed there as if it were staring right at me. I ran. I booked it down the road and kept running until I saw headlights in the distance. I waved my arms and shouted like a madman, still holding the handgun. Thankfully, it was my dad. He stopped and asked me what the hell I was doing. I jumped into the passenger seat and told him everything. To be honest, he didn't believe me at first, but I felt safer going back to the car with him than staying alone. So he drove us back. The footprints were still all around the car, but the deer head was gone. All that remained was a big patch of blood on the driver's seat. Once my dad saw that, I think he finally started to believe me. The deer's body was gone too. All that remained were drag marks in the snow. A little later, the tow truck finally arrived and took my car. My dad asked if I wanted to call the police, but honestly, I didn't have the energy. I was exhausted and just wanted to go to sleep. I figured the police wouldn't be able to do much anyway. And that's my story. I still have no idea who or what was out there in the woods that night, or what they wanted. Maybe they were just trying to scare me. Or maybe they had much worse intentions.